Welcome to STEM Paths. I'm Dr. Thornton Larson, where we have students unpacking papers, study paths, and the people behind them. Today, we have our guest hosts of Killian and Natalia, and they're going to be interviewing our guest today, Dr. I did it again. Thewissen. I'm so sorry. We've gone over it a couple times now, so I'm just embarrassed at this point. But Thewissen, yep, I will absolutely. Thewissen of the Department of Anatomy and Neurobiology at Northeastern Ohio Medical University. And with that, would you guys like to take it away on the paper on highlights of cetacean embryology?
So a quick introduction again. My name is Natalia Medrano. I am a biology major in pre-health concentration. My goal in the future is to attend dental school and become a pediatric dentist. And it is a pleasure to be doing this podcast with you.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Killian McDonald-Boyer. I'm a senior here at Sul Ross, majoring in biology with a minor in chemistry, and I'll be graduating this semester. And afterwards, I hope that I will be able to get into medical school with the hopes of becoming a rural family physician. So kind of before we dive into our questions today, we just wanted to provide the audience a brief summary of your paper titled Highlights of Cetacean Embryology. So from our understanding, this article looks at how whale and dolphin embryos develop and shows that during early stages, they actually look a lot more like land mammals, with things like tiny hind limb buds, before they shift into their final aquatic form. By following changes in features like the pharyngeal arches, ear ossicles, nasal openings, teeth, foreign limb, hind limbs, and the flukes or tails, the paper shows how development gives us clues about their evolution from land to water. And it has really been fascinating to look at how development and evolution are connected. So does that kind of highlight some of those key points from the article?
Yeah, I think it's great. Very good. Yes.
Okay, so we both found your paper very fascinating. What interested me the most was how cetacean embryos temporarily show structures like hind limb, buds, and features of terrestrial mammals that completely disappear before birth. I think it's amazing how there's still a little bit of trace of that history in their earlier stages.
Yeah, that's fair. Yes.
Alrighty. And so then something that really stood out to me from the article was actually the image in figure 9. I printed it out here just to refresh your memory. And I thought it was really interesting to see how it really shows that the base of all mammals are very similar. It's a very striking photo that helps to emphasize those ancestral traits that were being discussed in the paper, especially because if there are a lot of people maybe reading your article or coming across similar research, they may not fully understand like technical terminology and all the major research aspects of it, but I feel like it's really clear to tell from the image how those similarities are shown between all of the embryos.
Yeah, that was certainly the reason to write that paper. I think embryology is a really exciting field, and it's nowadays mostly studied as developmental biology by looking at genes and proteins, but I think the shapes are exciting too, and so I wanted to summarize that. I had the embryos, so I thought people need to see these pictures and then they'll get excited about it. So it was actually intended to be a paper that was not too technical, so that students and undergraduate and graduate students could read it. School textbooks even for biology. So I'm pretty excited about that. Early on, it's been down for a long time. Whales and dolphins had hind limb buds as embryos, but there was no good pictures around of that because it's very difficult to get those embryos. So I wanted to provide that too. So now people can go to that paper and actually see photos of these things. So there's actually not that much that's really new in that article, but it's a good summary. It was a the new thing is sort of the documentation, the photos of these embryos. Oh.
Yeah. Well, I think you did an excellent job. It really came through, obviously, as things that stood out to us. So I think that your goal came across from a student's perspective.
Right. Yep.
So now that we've kind of summarized the paper and told you some things that kind of stood out to us, we kind of wanted to get more into the process behind it and about your journey. So one of the first questions we have is what originally drew you to study cetacean embryology and actually decide to go forward with writing about your studies and research?
Yeah, so I went for biology as an undergraduate, and then I got a master's degree in biology, which was mostly anatomy, frankly, anatomy and embryology. And then I realized I was very interested in evolution, so I actually got a PhD in geology. And that allowed me to study evolution by going and collecting fossils. And I've spent, for 25 years, I would go for 1 month every year to Pakistan and India to collect fossils, because that's the place where whales originated. And we would find fossils of these earliest whales. So I ended up with lots of fossils of the first whales. And you realize then that it's exciting to see these shapes, the bones that you have change of these whales. But you also realize that there's like stuff in these bones. You go, I don't know why that is that way. So then you have to think about, can I look at the modern animals and can that help me understand why this, part of the skull of this fossil whale is the way it is? So I started then to work on to go to Alaska to work with local Inupiat people, Eskimos, who do some whale hunting still. And I was allowed to look at their catches and study the anatomy of modern whales, beluga whales and bowhead whales. The embryology came from that because some of the features that you see in the fossils are reminiscent of land mammals. And I thought they would probably be visible in embryos. And that's what I referred to earlier. Some of that stuff was published, just no good illustration. So I thought it would be really interesting to get embryos of modern whales to help me understand the evolution of the fossils. But once I started that, it also became a purpose in itself. It was so neat to do that. For instance, with the hind limb buds that you described, so modern whales have little hind limb buds sort of, between week 6 and week 12 of their, when they're in the uterus. And then those hind limb buds disappear. So we were interested in figuring out what the genes were that in a normal mammal, in a land mammal, cause hind limb development, and which of those genes is switched off, and therefore the hind limb stop developing in a dolphin. So we looked at gene expression and proteins transcribed by those genes that told us where this cascade of gene development that you expect to make normal hind limbs, where that's broken. So that was pretty exciting to do that. And of course, you can't do that with a fossil. It's just bones, right? You also can't do that with an embryo that's been dead for a long time, because the RNA and the proteins will be not in good shape. So we were able to do it on with some of these embryos of dolphins, and that's most of the embryos that you saw in that paper. Those are all mostly dolphin embryos. So that was a long-winded way of saying that what got me into embryos was fossils, but then embryos became a goal in themselves, and we could do some developmental biology with it, and then translate back to my fossil whales too. So it all hangs together, even though they seem very different subjects. Yeah.
That's awesome. So you kind of already brushed on these a little bit. I just want to pick your brain a little bit more. Were there any major impacts that you and your team and fellow researchers really hoped that your research or your paper would have, on the community, the environment, and any other like ongoing projects that may have been around at the time?
My biggest objective was what I said earlier, which was get pictures available to get in textbooks and to show young people like the two of you and everybody your age, things that we can actually see in embryos and in fossils, so to make them available for education. That was really the main purpose. I think that whale evolution is a great example of where different sciences, all the way from geology to biology, from anatomy to cell biology to embryology, come together and can show you these extreme adaptations that modern whales have, where those came from and how those evolve. And evolution is sort of the common theme for that all these sciences can help you understand. So I've really focused on some things that are and some organ systems that are very different in modern whales versus their land relatives. So hind limbs was one. Another one that we really looked at was teeth. So baleen whales, modern whales are the sort of two groups of them, toothed whales and baleen whales. Toothed whales have teeth, obviously. Baleen whales do not. Baleen whales don't have teeth, but instead they have these long long narrow plates that are made out of keratin. Keratin is the same stuff as your fingernails. And those plates, and your hair is also keratin. Hair, of course, is a strand. These are plates. So the whales that I study have 300 of these plates on each side of their jaw. So they have 600 baleen plates, and they're spaced about, 3 or 4 millimeters apart. And the whale uses this rack of baleen plates to filter water. And whatever is in the water, like microorganisms, shrimp and stuff, gets stuck on the plates, and that's what they eat. So that's how they feed. They basically have a colander in their mouth that they use to sieve the water, and that's what they eat. Now, in a bowhead whale embryo, so bowhead whales are baleen whales, they have these baleen racks. In a bowhead whale embryo, there's actually teeth still. But before they're born, the teeth disappear, just like the hind limbs that we talked about before. So I also looked in my lab at bowhead whale embryos to see how far tooth development goes and what switches it off. And the cool thing with that was that we also tried to look at some of the genes involved. And we determined that the genes that in a plant mammal, humans, mice, anything, but also toothed whales, the genes that are involved in mammals with teeth are switched off in a baleen whale, but then they're switched on again, and now they're not making teeth anymore, they're making baleen. So these whales have taken the same genes that in a normal mammal, like humans, make teeth. In baleen whales, they make baleen. Initially, they make teeth, then that's switched off, and then it's close to baleen. So that's such a cool story. Yeah.
No, I'm blown away. That's so cool.
I think of it as I go to, as I work on my house because something's broken, I might be fixing my sink with tools from my tool chest, and then, a closet door upstairs doesn't work, and I'm actually taking the same tool chest with the same screwdrivers and hammers, and I do a very different job, and that's the same that the body is doing. And it's using these genes to make teeth, but then it's also using those same genes to make baleen. So I thought that was a cool way of doing it. That's the way evolution does its work.
Yeah, that was a really good analogy too.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So continuing with some questions about your journey. What are some of the major technical or logistical challenges of working with cetacean embryos?
Yeah. Well, they're very difficult to get, of course, because you're not allowed to go out and and you can't breed cetaceans, and you're also not allowed to kill them. So the embryos that you saw in that paper, that's actually a really interesting story. So those embryos are most of those are embryos of a spotted dolphin. Spotted dolphins live in the Pacific. 30, 40 years ago, the tuna industry was catching tuna in the Pacific for consumption in the US. And interestingly, when you catch tuna, often if there's a group of tuna in the ocean, often above them, close to the surface, are dolphins that are feeding on the same stuff. What tuna boats used to do is they used to surround these schools of tuna with a net, and then they would pull the net up to catch the tuna, but the dolphins on top would also be caught in, and they would drown in the process because they can't breathe if they're kept underwater. So some scientists, actually a good friend of mine, Bill Perrin, he worked at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, realized that thousands of dolphins were drowning in the tuna industry while they weren't even the purpose of the tuna fishermen. The tuna fishermen just wanted to catch the tuna. So he started this movement to get tuna fisheries more dolphin safe. And eventually a law was passed in the US. I mean, a lot of other people worked in this too, but Bill was one of them. To get to require that tuna that was sold in the US was caught by dolphin-safe methods. And what the tuna men then had to do is they had to, before they pull the net up, pull one side of the net down on the top so that the dolphins could escape on that side. You still had the occasional dolphin that was unlucky and got trapped and drowned, but dolphin mortality went way down at that point. So that was a really neat way in which scientists and the public realized what was happening to all these dolphins. Now, to get the tuna fishery people, to keep them honest, the U.S. would send observers, often graduate students, on the tuna fisheries boat to make sure that they were actually going through this extra step to let the dolphins out. And that worked well. And as I said, occasionally a dolphin is unlucky and drowns anyway. So then these observers, graduate students often, would take the dolphin that did drown in the tuna net, and they would measure it, they would determine what species it is, and they would also cut it open and see if it was pregnant. And if it was, they would take the embryo. So that's the embryos I got. So basically, I got embryos from dolphin-safe tuna fisheries. So it's pretty counterintuitive. On the other hand, it's such a success story for dolphin conservation that I'm pretty proud of it. And I was involved. This was before my time, but I wasn't involved with it. I got the embryos later, but I'm pretty pleased with how science and the public work together to get that going.
Yeah.
Long answer, I'm sorry.
No, it's an interesting story and provided a little history there.
So we were very curious.
Yeah.
Yeah. But very difficult. You could do that for that species, but not for most others because they're not hunted, or this was a lucky break for us. Yeah.
Mm. Okay, so we noticed that you mentioned in the study that the molecular mechanism behind things like the development of fluke formation are not fully understood. Is there any present research that you know is going on to help fill these gaps, or anything that you are currently involved in?
Yeah, so I had, for the fluke development, I had a student finish a year and a half ago with her PhD. Leah Gavezi is her name. And she studied fluke development. And she did it in a bunch of different ways. She looked at anatomy, at the shape of the vertebrae in the tail. She looked at fossils, but she also did a bunch of embryology stuff where she just looked at shapes of the fluke changing as the whale develops before birth. And then she tried to look at the gene expression there too. And that wasn't as successful as we had hoped. So she got somewhere with it, but I was never totally convinced that we got the right genes and the right. But that's how science is. Her thesis was very good and had a bunch of chapters. I can't remember, maybe 5 chapters. And it wasn't quite like the red hot, oh wow, this is it. But on the other hand, she really tried, and we made the best choices in the genes she was going to look at. So, well, like I say, I think it was a good start. We haven't found the ultimate reason for fluke development. But so we really tried. So somebody else will have to do that, but it's going to be very hard because there too you can't get all the samples you want. It's easy to do that work, with mice or something, but mice don't have flukes. But you knew that.
Yeah.
How do you think research into cetacean embryology contributes to medical and biomedical fields?
I think it does is exactly what is going on right now, that the two of you were interested in this and are interested. So it shows you, and that it inspires young people to be interested in anatomy, and anatomy is one of the fields that contributes, that is part of medical education. So I think it's also important for people in the medical professions to understand that there's a continuity between the body that they work with, which is the human body, with that of any other mammal. Those bodies are basically have the same components. Their sizes are different, and there might be, minor differences like no hair, or, maybe no gallbladder. Whales don't have a gallbladder, by the way. But basically, all the organs are there. It might be differently developed, and it's good for students to realize that the design of all mammals is the same, but that then there's variations that might make one thing bigger, like the brain in humans, or get rid of something like hind limbs in cetaceans. But they're all variations on a theme. Of course, that's what biomedicine is based on. As we're trying to understand what goes wrong in, diabetes, we can't experiment with humans. They use mice for that. You can only do that because the physiology of mice is actually very similar to that of humans. So it's a legitimate way of translating the experiments when you're trying to figure out something about human health to actually do the work on a different species like mice.
Agreed. I think it was very eye-opening, especially this year with taking mammalogy and looking into scientific articles like yours, because even just a couple years ago, or especially when I was younger, I was probably very naive to the fact that, all mammals and most vertebrates to an extent are very closely related, anatomically and things like that. So I think it'll be very beneficial in our future in healthcare to kind of have this background knowledge from your research.
Good.
Alrighty, so kind of moving into the actual writing of the paper. So for a couple of semesters now throughout our school year, we've had to read a lot of scientific papers and then provide summaries for them, most of them for Dr. Larson's class. But we've never actually had to go through the process of, doing research and actually writing one or kind of seeing how that works. So can you kind of briefly break down the process for students who might be interested in eventually kind of writing some research papers of their own?
Yeah, so I have a student now in my lab. She graduated. Her name is Kat Mars. That's her name. she graduated from college last summer, and she's now taking a year off before she goes back to graduate school. She wants to go be a wildlife biologist, but for now, for a year, she's working with me, sort of an anatomical subjects. So she took a mammalogy class in college, and then I, when she started to work for me, we looked at some potential projects that were all stuff that my lab is good at. The methods we have, and the subjects we have, and the fossils we have, and the embryos we have, and the samples we have. Right? It can't be something on some subject that I don't have the materials for. And so she picked something that she liked and that we could do. And what she ended up picking was some of the bones in these whales have growth layers, like tree rings. Every year they put on an extra layer. So that means that you can tell from some whales, from some bones, how old the whale is, because you can just count the tree rings, not tree rings, the bone rings in the whale. So she was going to work that out using the ear bones of beluga whales. So she did a bunch of histology. She learned the techniques to do that. Take these bones, which basically are the size of a walnut, and you cut them with a fancy saw, basically, and then you grind them down. You cut slices out of them. You grind the slice down so thin. You glue it on a glass microscope slide, and then the light shines through it, so you can study the layers on a microscope. And so she did that for a couple of bones. It wasn't working out. This is research. You don't know what you're going to find and what's going to work and not going to, and what's not going to work. But then, as she's sort of struggling with this, using different dyes to make the layers stand out more, we realized that in these whales that she was studying, beluga whales, the layers are not annual, they're not formed year by year, and they're also sloppy. I don't know what those whales do with their layers. So that didn't work out. But then she found that in some of the fossil whales that I have, these 50 million year old whales from Pakistan, those actually have very distinct and beautiful layers. So now she is trying to cut the bones of those animals, those ear bones to count them. So she's in the data gathering process where she's trying to make those microscope slides, and together I'm helping her describe, measure, count the layers. And then we're going to try to relate that to the ages of the whales. And the way we're going to do that is that we have jaws of these whales, and we have a sense for at what times they replace their teeth. They have two tooth generations, just like humans. They have milk teeth and adult teeth, and we know something about what the timing is. So that's the data gathering stage. Then, so what will come out of that is a bunch of photos with pictures of these slides, microscope slides, but also tables with thicknesses and plots of thicknesses of these different layers over the life of this animal. And then she'll have to write that up. And with science, that often is a pretty standardized method. You write your results up, and that's basically what I just said. There's photos, and there's the spreadsheets of measurements. You write an introduction where you tell what other people have done with regard to this, and then you write a discussion that describes how you interpret your findings. So it's a very logical and it's a straightforward process in terms of writing, and it's very difficult to do, but that's a pretty exciting result. So I think what's important about it is that, yes, she picked a subject that she was interested in, from an array of subjects that were doable, right, was in my lab. She did the research, it goes wrong again, and the third time it goes right, and then you keep going on that. So persistence is important. And also every time something goes wrong, I remember this quote from Edison, the guy who invented, lights at the beginning of the century. And somebody asked him, they said, well, it seems that you've failed 99 times to develop a lamp. And he goes, no. I discovered 99 ways to not make a lamp. 100 times I've discovered the way. So for every failure, the way to think of it is as a success. And the same is true for medical research. There's so much stuff where it doesn't work the way you want it to work, except you've learned something, and that's what's important to focus on. You got to be patient. Yeah.
And Killian, you should be able to relate to some of that a little bit because you've presented posters at conferences before, so you've done a lot of this research stuff.
Yeah.
So, so it should relate a little bit. But that probably leads you into your next question too, so.
Yeah. So with all that, was there ever any part of the writing process that you actually enjoyed during the time of your writing all these articles and stuff? Like, is there any part that you're like, oh yeah, it's not horrible to have to sit down and do this?
I think the exciting parts are often, not in the most surprising places. I'll be driving to work and go, oh, now I understand how this fact fits within with something I wasn't thinking about. Often those moments of, when you're reading the newspaper or waking up in the morning, so that's the exciting parts. The actual writing up, well, depending on what the subject is and how complicated it is, that's slow and plodding. I think what do I want to say? I think that's not the most difficult parts. I think for science, often the most difficult part is actually where do you get the funding to do this work? And that means you have to write a grant proposal. Yeah. Grant proposals funding rates are low. And you have to sort of convince everybody who's reviewing it and the funding agency that it's worth funding this work. And it's obviously reasonable that you have to do that, but that can be frustrating because you don't know what they're going to focus on. Well, we needed more on this. Oh, had I known that, I would have written it different. Yeah. So those are the more frustrating parts. Yeah.
Understandable.
And did you always see yourself in this position in field work, or did you used to have different expectations?
You mean when I was starting my career?
Yes. Did you always think you were gonna focus on this, or? Yes.
So I have always collected fossils since I was very young. My birthday present for my 12th birthday was a rock hammer. But I think that was fossils, and it was fossils of anything: ammonites, trilobites, clams, snails, everything. As I went to university, like I said, I was interested in biology, and I realized that all these sub-disciplines of biology could contribute to my understanding of how animals. I ended up in working in mammals, and specifically the more anatomical questions. I don't know what that wasn't a coincidence, but because that's the kind of stuff I was liking. But I think I don't know what to say. So okay. So then I ended up in a medical school teaching anatomy to medical students. But specifically, the important part was that I could do anatomical work, which is what I like to do, and so I teach it I teach it on humans, but my research is on different mammals. Whales wasn't the first thing I worked on. I used to work on bats and on primates, all kinds of different mammals. Yeah.
It's cool. Yeah, we were kind of wondering how, whenever we found out that you were at the medical school, we were like, oh, I kind of wonder how that happened or how that works. It makes sense if you're teaching anatomy, though. It still plays back into your research a lot. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, so at this medical school, we have, for instance, a good colleague of mine. She studies, her interest is in figuring out why babies are saying, and that's partly because their throat muscles and the nerves going to those muscles are not developed well. And so she studies that by looking at how pigs learn to how the development of the pig nursing apparatus, the throat and the tongue, works. So they're, usually when you study something with an interest in solving a human question, you go to a lab animal for those pigs. Yeah.
It's cool. Alrighty. And then I think one of the most important things we were wondering, has there been a time or a project or any kind of experience throughout your career that you've considered the most rewarding when you're doing this kind of research and work?
I think the most dramatic turn was it was basically my entry into studying whales, which then eventually became the only thing I did. So that was during the Gulf War. In the early 90s, I was in Pakistan collecting. The Gulf War broke out. They told us to leave. And I spent all this money going to Pakistan. I only got, I can't remember, 4 or 5 days to collect fossils. So that was pretty depressing. However, one of those fossils was an ear bone that had an ear ossicle in it, a little tiny bone that is involved with sound transmission. So we studied that. That became a paper in Nature, a very exciting paper, got a lot of press. So then the next year I went back. I didn't have much money left in my grant. It was a grant from National Geographic Society. I only had money for myself. I couldn't take anybody with me. And I'm trying to collect fossils in this area in Pakistan. And I was interested in land mammals. I mean, I had the paper on whales, but that wasn't a big deal at that point. In my view, I wanted land mammals. And as we were walking to the localities, the places where you find fossils that have the land mammals, we kept crossing these sediments that were laid down in an ocean. And I wasn't interested in this because I was interested in the land mammals. But every time we would cross these marine beds, obviously not marine now, they used to be marine 50 million years ago, we would find like fish teeth and little pieces of bone, not just clams and shells. It's like, wow, there's all this bone in these marine rocks. We should spend more time here. So we kept on spending more and more time in these marine beds. And eventually, a few days before we were done with our field work, we find this whole skeleton of a fossil whale.
Wow.
That was a big deal because it was the first skeleton of a fossil whale that had hind limbs big enough to support its body. It was called Ambulocetus. So we described that in science, the journal Science. That was a big deal for science because people knew that there must be whales that had hind limbs because they were related to land mammals, but we didn't have any. And that was the first one. So that was pretty.
Wow.
That was very. That was the most exciting and unforeseen thing. And since then, I started to work. Well, the rest of the story I basically already told you earlier. My research moved more and more into whales and dolphins, first fossil ones, and then later modern ones and embryos. So that's where we are.
Well, congratulations.
So I think the excitement of finding a fossil, nobody has ever seen this animal or imagined this animal, and certainly nobody has ever seen this fossil that I'm holding there, that I'm digging up there. Every bone I take out of the rock, nobody has ever seen. I'm the first one. So that's very
It's awesome.
What is one piece of advice that you'd give your undergrad self?
Which
Yeah. I've always followed the things I was excited about. And I would, and I think that was a wise choice. I was not afraid to start new things, knowing that some of them would fail and did fail. But the only sure way to fail is to not try. Right? So I thought that worked very well. I think I was lucky enough to have very supportive parents and a very supportive surroundings, so that was good. A lot of kids, that's much harder. But I think it's important for young people to be open to learning about the rest of the world, even if if they think it's going to be stuff where they're never going to that's going to be too hard or just try. And if it fails, then don't beat yourself up over it. Just, at least not know that didn't work and try something else. Just keep trying and be persistent and be curious is, I guess, the advice. Yeah.
And if you weren't in this field, what would you be doing?
Yeah, I've always wanted to be in this field, so I ended up there. It's worth to think about. I think before I got into science, I was excited about archaeology, which is kind of interesting because that's also digging in the dirt, right? So it's maybe not all that, except that's in the way academic structure is. That's usually in anthropology departments, and it's not a science; it's kind of history. So I'm glad I am where I am now. Better suited. I also really like the combination of dealing with medical students and the dental students, with young people that are excited about learning about human health, and then doing research with other students and technicians and postdocs, and so for the research. So I think the balance in my life is actually it's interesting to do all these different things and approach this big subject of, natural science from a number of different directions.
Yeah, it's definitely an impressive career. And then kind of lastly, what is something that you wish you think more people should understand about scientists and the research process that they have to go through?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like there is now sort of people are very skeptical about frankly about facts. When scientists say something, it's usually, maybe not always, but it's usually founded, underlined by observations and rational thinking. There's a lot of stuff that I hear and see where people say what they think, and then without that filter of, is this actually correct, but this is the way they want it to be, and then it comes out that they try to convince people by just arguing about it. But some of that stuff is just not reasonable. You can be very convincing in your arguments, but I wish that people were more thinking about the facts that underlie those things. So that's kind of sad. I think that the American public, big part of it, has lost its interest in sort of evaluating not just the speaker, but the arguments that the speaker, or the data that the speaker bases their convictions on.
Mm-hmm.
So I wish that science education was better at all high schools in the United States. I mean, it's good at many high schools, but I think that's an important thing that needs to be taught, not just high school, elementary school, everywhere. college, everywhere. Yeah. So that's what I wish.
Yeah.
So I just want to take this moment to thank you, Dr. Thewissen, for taking the time to speak with us today. I want to thank our guest host, Killian and Natalia, for making the time and finding the papers and doing all the good work on that. And I think this has been a really great conversation. I honestly learned so much. We stuck more on the science than some of the episodes because I think you just expressed some really, really interesting topics that I found absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
So thank you again for all that.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you for taking
All right.
the time to meet with us, and hopefully these kind of podcasts will, help with the getting facts back out there in science. So
I hope so too.
Yep, this has been
All right.
STEM Paths. I'm Thornton Larson with our guest, Dr. Thewissen, and Killian and Natalia. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and have a great rest of your day.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.